All right, what's up, everybody? Gonna do a little Photoshop tutorial here about how to put together UI from a UI kit. So let's just go ahead and launch right into this thing. I've got my UI kit here I downloaded from the web, unzipped, ready to go. But before we open that, I'm gonna start a new canvas in Photoshop and just kind of set our screen size and ratio so we can drag this stuff in properly. So I'm gonna go ahead and tab over to the web browser just to check what resolution we're going to be working at. And 720 by 1280 is where we're going to start just because it's one of the most common used resolutions. And obviously, pick whichever one is your target resolution. But anyway, so let's go to Photoshop, File New. And then we're going to, on the right hand side over here, change your units from inches to pixels, obviously, because that's our screen units. So we're going to go ahead and set that. Go to pixels. Width is going to be 720. And we've got our 1280 for our height. Resolution stays 72. Remember, always leave your resolution 72 for screen stuff, well, for the most part. So let's go RGB, create, and we have our working canvas. So you can go ahead and double click the background layer here in the gray just to unlock the background so you can drag stuff from another document. Go ahead and name the layer, may as well. I'm not going to just because, so probably name it if you're going to keep it. But I'm just going to replace that really. All right, so a couple things before I start dragging and dropping stuff from my UI kit. I was talking about this earlier or the other day in class. Up top, we have our move tool is kind of your primary move and like selection tool for this stuff. I would suggest leave this thing toggled to auto select by layer. Probably leave your transform controls turned on as well so you can see all that stuff. But mainly so we can select our individual UI pieces and drag and drop them into our interface. We're probably going to toggle it out to select by group as well whenever we start selecting and dragging groups, but it just depends what you want to grab and drag. So just keep, long story short, pay attention to this up top here and you should be fine. So let's go ahead and toggle over to our UI kit, and we're going to open that thing up. So UI kits, like I was explaining before, have usually, if they're a decent kit, a bunch of layers, a bunch of groups in layers, all named out correctly. It's a kind of a complicated document if you're not used to working with Photoshop. So this is pretty typical what you're going to get. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out my new library here. But I mean, look at how many different folders we've got here on the right hand side. I've got 15 folders full of stuff. So it's just a giant canvas you can pick and choose from. Since this is the one I'm going to be dragging stuff from, I'm going to go ahead and undock it from up top in my um, uh, canvas area in Photoshop. So let me go in and just drag grab the tab from up top, drag straight down to undock it from your working area, and that way we can essentially drag and drop from this palette without having to tab back and forth up top in our tabs. It's just faster in my opinion. So anyway, let's go ahead and zoom in on this thing, and let's grab a couple of pieces to drag and drop inside our interface. So I'm just going to do a simple login screen here. Um, I'll just drag and drop these elements out. So again, simple stuff here that I've been doing on my keyboard and not explaining, so I should probably actually explain them. To zoom in, Z, obviously for your zoom tool, that's pretty standard, but it's over here in your left-hand side in your tool bin when you want to zoom in and out. Just use your zoom tool, holding down Option or Alt, depending on if you're on Mac or PC, will let you zoom out. It should default to zoom in. Spacebar, hold down spacebar, and it will toggle to the hand tool so you can move your canvas around if you wanted to. Actually comes in really handy with this kind of operation. All right, anyway, hand tool's over here in the bin if you need that, by the way. So let's go ahead and get down to actually doing something. Grab your move tool over here. Again, auto select by layer, snagged from in the top left hand corner, and essentially just select whatever UI elements you want to grab and double check in your palette over here on the right hand side in your layers palette that you've got either a single layer selected or if you're going to be grabbing the entire group, right? So one of the things that I would have done wrong if I wasn't paying attention to this is if I select this object here just by with a single click, I might accidentally select just the enter text or just the rectangle for the button. I want the whole thing. Okay, I don't want to just drag over one little chunk of an element at a time. I want to drag over the whole damn thing. So instead of selecting the layer, I'm going to grab the group on my layers palette over here. And that's just these little folder icons. And notice this says like a folder inside of a folder. So just pay attention to which group you are grabbing before you drag and drop. So anyway, let me move this out of the way. Straight from my layers palette, my enter button, which is named correctly. Drag and drop right in the middle of our interface. It's gonna. This one's asking me if I want to match the profiles. This doesn't make any difference for what we're doing. Just completely ignore this if it pops up. All right, there we go. All right, so my obviously the resolution I'm working at for my device is slightly larger than the UI kit presented. It's all a relative size anyway. Just transform this thing. So basic stuff with Photoshop. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to hit Control Plus and use my little space bar here to zoom in. The bounding box around this thing, remember, when you are scaling objects in Photoshop, you've got this little bounding box. Don't just grab the bounding box and drag because you will squash your element. You don't want to do that. You want to hold down Shift while you do this, and Shift will proportionally scale your element. Keep the proportion on this stuff, otherwise your fonts end up looking weird. We want good, clean, non-stretched fonts. That's a pretty important thing. Pay attention to your guides too. Like, look, if you notice, my auto snaps will turn on, my auto guides. Just use those. Make sure things are centered just by paying attention to that stuff. Another keyboard shortcut. I've got this enter element placed where I want it. I want to scale it up a little bit further. Again, remember I'm scaling this up to accommodate people's big fat thumbs. So I'm going to scale this thing up a little bit, but I'm going to hold down Shift and Command at the same time, or Shift and Alt at the same time. Sorry, Shift and Alt at the same time, and that'll scale it proportionally. But it'll scale it based on our anchor point in the center of that object. So if you do Shift and Alt while you scale, that'll scale it based on your anchor point in the middle, and that's a really nice way once you get an element centered to essentially resize it based on the center point of the screen. Anyway, hit enter when you're done to solidify that transformation. And if you want to see what it looks like without the bounding boxes on it, you can just turn off your show transform controls or deselect that chunk. So that's the drag and drop kind of function. That's pretty straightforward. Let me do it again here just to kind of, again, show the process. So let me go back to my my other UI kit piece, which is actually down here outside of my Photoshop file since I undocked it. So let me snag that. All right, so I'm going to just grab a couple of the pieces here. Let's say I want another chunk of this login screen here. I'm just going to grab the username and password chunk. I mean, hell, I could grab this whole object if I wanted to. So let me try that. I'm just going to grab pretty much everything else on this screen. So I'm going to select this layer, and a couple ways you could do it. You could just track upwards. I think that's the easiest way to do it. I'm just going to track upwards in my layer palette. So I'm going to select one of these objects, and just going up the layers palette using the eyeballs on the left, I'm going to determine which folder I want to grab pretty much all of the stuff inside here. So just eyeball off and on. There's my login image, and you can kind of look at this. This is like a hierarchy tree anyway, which makes sense. So I mean, it's probably this whole login screen chunk right here on number 13. So let's just double check that. There we go. There's the whole piece right there. Now I've already snagged the enter piece out of here, so I'm going to go ahead and kill that out of my layer order because I don't want to bring that over since I've just gotten it. So my enter button over here that I've already grabbed, I don't need that. So I'm going to readjust my interface a little bit here. Kind of running out of space. There we go. I'm going to grab this enter button group and delete it out of my setup. So to do that, obviously, there's a bunch of ways you could do this. You can grab this layer, drag it to your bin, or I think what's a little bit less, you're going to get less errors this way. Just grab the layer, or the group in this case, and then just click the trash can on the bottom right hand side down here. And I'm going to delete my group and the contents just to get that out of the way. There we go. And now I'm going to grab the rest of this login screen and just drag that whole folder into my interface. There we go. All right, now, what I just did there, this is something to watch out for. I did that without paying any attention whatsoever. I just grabbed and dragged that, it looks like a shading layer over here on accident because I had auto select by layer selected. This is what I was saying before. You don't want to leave this on all the time. I'm going to Control Z back a notch here, and I'm going to change my auto select to group. And now I can select this entire group. It just defaults up to this enter button group. And I can move this around. Now it auto grouped my enter button and my enter larger enter button that I created down here. I don't want that in the group because I had that where I had that positioned earlier where I wanted it. So let me notch back here a step, and I'm gonna select this object down here by layer, and I'm going to take it out of the group because I don't necessarily want it in there. So it's my enter button here and my rectangle. I'm going to grab both of these layers and I'm going to create a group. So let's go down and I'm just going to create a new group here with this little folder icon. And now since I had those two layers selected, they automatically jumped into the group. That's the nice thing about Photoshop. You can select any number of layers and organize them into a group. Double click the name to rename it. So this is just going to be something logical, enter button. And I'm going to take this out of the group by dragging it all the way to the top of my interface. Notice it's not on top of the folder. You got to go up and there's a slight line in between there that you'll see. You drop it there and now it's out of the grouping order. So now my background and my enter button are two separate groups and I can move those individually now. Now I'm going to collapse this down just so I don't have to pay attention to all those layers. But now I can grab this group, again auto select by group, grab this group, and I can manipulate just that group and resize it, Control T, to fit. Now there's some shadow on there. This is a good instance of what I was talking about earlier. I'm going to hit Control minus to zoom out a little bit, where you might want to resize something based on the center point proportionally. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get this fairly well centered in my screen, and I'm going to grab my anchor point just by rolling over it after I've hit Control T, and I'm going to move this to the middle of where I want this graphic to resize from, which is the middle of this object here. And then I'm going to hold down Shift and Option at the same time, or Option or Shift and Alt if you're on PC. And then I'm going to resize based on the middle point. And see, again, how much easier that is proportionally to move that stuff. Maybe about like that. And now I can move this stuff down on my screen. Now I'm going to move it down by nudging. I'm just going to hit V to make sure I'm on my move tool. That's the keyboard shortcut for your move tool up there, as you see. So I'm going to hit V, and I'm going to hold down Shift on my keyboard and use my arrow keys to nudge that down a little bit. I like using the arrow keys a little bit better for this stuff whenever I'm eyeballing where it's supposed to go. And bingo, there I've got my login screen. Now this isn't perfect, obviously. I need to trim a little bit of white space down here where there's shadowing. So I'm going to go ahead and go back in and auto select by layer. I'm going to hit Control 0 to zoom in on the screen. Control 0 proportionally zoom stuff in. And I'm going to go ahead and select this background layer and either move it down or dump it, one of the two. I'm just going to go ahead and move it down a little bit so there's no shadowing down there. All right, so some other things that'll help you keep things aligned in your setup here in your palette is guides and grids. So guides and grids are kind of one of the strong suits of working in a graphics program as opposed to just freehanding stuff. You want to be able to use this stuff to line things up on your screen. Now, there are auto snaps and auto grids, obviously, in Photoshop, but sometimes you want to get a little bit more finite than that, a little bit more fine-tuned, or however you want to say it. Easiest way to do this, turn on your grids. Okay, you can set up, I'm not going to go through how to set up grids specifically. I can go into the preferences and show you where that is, but I want to at least show you how to turn them on and off. Pretty much all you got to do is hit Control and quotation marks, and that'll turn the grid on your screen. I've got a pretty fine grid set on mine, but that's the idea. You can just toggle that grid on and off with Control and then quotation marks, and you can see whether things are lined up on your screen as far as the edges of objects and that kind of stuff. You just pay attention to your grid, and things should line up really well. Just always try to organize by a grid. I'm going to turn those back off. Control quotation marks. The other thing you can use is guides, and guides are used by pulling downwards and outwards from the rulers on your screen. Now, if you don't have rulers on your screen, that is keyboard shortcut Command R or Control R if you're on PC. So basically toggle your rulers on by hitting Control R or Command R, and then grab from the middle of the ruler. Don't grab the edge of the ruler, grab just the center between the edge and on your tool bin and the edge of the ruler itself. Grab inside there, hold down on your keyboard, drag. Okay, this will let you drop guides wherever you want. Say if I wanted to create an element that was aligned to the edge of this circle, I could then drop guides out and I could line things up. Say for instance, like if I wanted to over justify the username and password, I could now grab this user chunk and I could use my arrow keys to nudge that over and line that up via the edge, and done. So that's again another way you can just toggle this off with Control and then colon or semicolon, or Command semicolon if you're on Mac. So there you go. I don't necessarily like what I did here, but you kind of get the plan. So that's just some kind of quick basic stuff in Photoshop as far as using layers and organizing layers. I want to show how to export all of this stuff. So once you get your stuff layered in Photoshop, and I would strongly recommend making sure everything is like this. It's layered and it's grouped and it's named. You've got it all set up. I'm actually going to throw away this background layer because I didn't use it. So let me dump that in the trash. All right. So let's go ahead and take some of the stuff that's in here and let's export it out to go into InVision. So I'm going to select a couple of elements and export these separately. I mean, I've only got one screen mocked up, so I'll just export some of these in different chunks to add them into InVision. So let's say, for instance, I wanted to have my enter button slide in on the screen in InVision. I would want to export that as a different chunk, different PNG than the background, right? So what I'm going to do is go into, again, my layers palette, pay attention to that, make sure auto select by group is turned on, and I'm going to grab my enter button. Okay, there's my enter button right there. There's a bunch of different ways to export this. It just depends on how quickly you want to do it, what you're aiming for. One of the fastest ways to do it, I think, is to have the whatever chunk you want selected. Okay, and I can either go by group or I could collapse this group down. But I'm going to essentially right click on this or control click on it, and you're going to do export as. So, or you can do a quick export as PNG, but I'm just going to do an export as to show the palette that pops up. So here's my export as palette. Nice thing about this palette is I can export, now again, notice the group that I had selected comes out as a full group that's exported. Right now, this is formatted for web formats, which is primarily what we're going to use whenever we start sticking stuff into an app format. PNG, JPEG, GIF, and SVG. Obviously, we're going to be using PNGs and JPEGs for the most part here. Those are your two most common things we're going to use to engineer graphics. PNGs, remember though, include transparency. That's the important part. I've got a little bit of rounding on these corners. That's a pretty short radius on that, but I want to include that. Otherwise, I'm going to have blocked white chunks on the end of my button, which I don't want. So PNG is for transparency. I've got transparency selected. Check the file. It'll even give you a file size preview, which is nice. And then I'm going to export this to my folder. So this is going to be on my desktop, and let me explore that real quick here. UIKit and enter button PNG, right? Export. There we go. So now it just baked out that PNG with just the enter button on it. And now all I have to do is just toggle the enter button off. I don't even necessarily have to do that. When I do export as, I can just leave these layers turned on, but I just like to do that to keep track of what I've exported. So I'm going to turn this off to just tell myself I've exported this layer. Now I can select this next group, control click it or right click it, export as, or quick export as PNG, really either way. Check my palette, check my sizes on this stuff, make sure it's the correct items that I actually want to export. PNG for transparency. I am going to export into the same folder. And this one I'm going to call background, or just BG for short. There you go. So and just continue on. I mean, whatever screens you set up, you can just export them all out individually as groups. Or, again, this just depends on your working methods. You guys could even set up each screen that you wanted to work on as a separate Photoshop file. It doesn't make any difference. I think this is maybe an easier way to keep things organized, but who cares? It's just up to you how you organize this stuff. So kind of to sum it up, you basically drag and drop stuff into palettes. Use a couple of tools, the move tool, you got the zoom tool and the hand tool down here. That's about it. Text tool is, I mean, relatively straightforward. If you want to add text inside your palette, you just grab your text tool and you click and drag, right? So that's pretty easy. Type whatever text you want, select it, and all your options are up top. So just remember in Photoshop, select your tool and then look up top for your options. That's almost always where it's at. So there we go. Add another extra layer in there. Why not? So let's just say we've created all of our items. I got everything ready to go. I've exported all my pieces.